Ready, set.
Thank you.
Well, I'm the oldest from the first marriage. My mom and dad got married, and he adopted my brother Andy and I when I think I was 5 and Andy was 3, 4 or 2, somewhere when we were living in Meridian, Mississippi. Then shortly after we moved to Meridian, mom and dad had our sister Sydney. We call her Sid. She lives in Milwaukee now. She's a music person. Maybe 3. I got to think about it. 2.5. You get old, you forget. We got along very well. Yeah. Well, still do. Well, I just remember living in Meridian and being around all these pilot people. Even though I was young, they're just kind of a different breed of people. And then, I remember going to first grade in Meridian. It was segregated. And then moving to Orange Park, Florida shortly after that, which was not segregated. And, the things happened pretty quick, but I remember he was going to go on the Forrestal, and I remember flying to Europe and picking up the VW Bug like my mom talked about in Germany. We were going to spend a year in Germany and go to school, and we weren't there very long, and then the fire on the Forrestal happened, and his dad was Cinques Navure at the time, stationed in London, so we drove back to, I think it was Asti, Belgium, took the ferry over to Dover and drove to London, where we eventually met him. I do remember, I don't remember a lot of chores. I remember living on the base in Meridian, Mississippi, which, 2 things I remember most about that. One, a young man up the street who taught me how to ride a bike. John Stump, his father was he might have been skipper of the squadron, I don't know, but who later died in a plane crash. But he taught me how to ride a bike. And then many years later at a New Hampshire primary, I ran into him at the night of the primary. And then one of the other things I remember about Meridian was sitting in the living room with my dad, watching the original Jeopardy with Art Fleming, and there he is on the TV. And he won one episode and had a chance to win the second one, but didn't get the final question right. So, but in terms of, I just remember him being around the house. So there weren't a whole lot of chores to do in Navy housing, I don't think. So, we did normal things, that fathers and sons and kids do. It was, the housing we were in was all basically Navy pilots and their families. There were a gazillion kids around. So, and they tended to kind of rotate in and out because people were always getting transferred, but there was just a lot of fun things to do. We went and looked at them, certainly, but, they can't take you for a ride. To sit in that plane with an ejection seat, you got to be a certain size. So, that was a long time ago. I think by the time he left for the Forrestal, I was probably 6, maybe 7. I do remember going back to France and staying 2 weeks on a hotel in the Riviera Cannes, and then we drove all through France, went to Paris. We had to go see the Tomb of Napoleon. In addition to the Eiffel Tower, I remember going to Avignon to see, where the papal deal was, a few other things. But I remember a fair amount. It was all fun. I came in from school one day, and my mother was sitting at the kitchen table crying. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Well, your father's been shot down." And that's all I know right now, but I expect to hear more from your granddad pretty soon. So, and she's right. That night, I did, in fact, go to my first Cub Scout meeting. Went with a family across the street. The Crumplers, I think, took me, and which, bit of a sideline, their father, Carl, he was, at that point, was an Air Force F-4 pilot who'd also been shot down, but he was still technically missing in action. We were very lucky in that regard. I mean, because of who his father was, the Vietnamese made it known pretty quickly. The family across the street that I'm talking about, they didn't know for another 2 or 3 years. I remember being in class one day and their mother coming and knocking on the door saying he's on the list. And that was this guy, Doug Hagdahl, had gotten released. He was I think a mess cook who fell off a destroyer and was captured. And they finally realized that, he wasn't really a combatant. And he was offered release, and they said, you need to go, because he knew all the names of everybody who'd been captured. They used to come visit, and my mom alluded to the cigar, but he would get up every morning and he would go out in the backyard or on the patio by the pool and go through this workout with a jump rope and sit-ups and push-ups and the whole 9 yards. He would come in and brew a pot of this just ungodly strong espresso, which really nobody drank back then, and have that and a muffin and some juice, and then he would light a cigar and take about 4 puffs, and a cigar in some form or another was in his mouth the rest of the day. But he was an interesting man. Roberta was a piece of work. She's I would say she's a one of a kind, but she had an identical twin, so that wouldn't be the total truth. But she was a very unique, I don't know if kinetic's the right way to describe her, but she was just constantly in motion, constantly trying to learn something, do something, teach something. So she was a pretty unique, extremely attractive lady. She basically just, when you're the ages we are, you're a little bit bulletproof, but basically she just got us involved in, every kind of sporting extracurricular activity thing we could do. And when there weren't seasons going on, be it football or baseball, weather permitting, we'd go to the beach and go surfing. I mean, we did all sorts of things, and that was pretty much what we did. I mean, we had there were a bunch of kids on our street, that the Crumpler family across the street, and a lot of other kids in the neighborhood that, and then once you start going to school, you develop friends there as well. But we stayed real busy. I think that all the time he was gone, I think we got 2 letters. Another time, there were some black and white films that the Vietnamese had released that, anyway, the guy, I think it was actually then Lieutenant Fallon, he was later technically my air wing, or my air wing commander out at Oceana, Fox Fallon. He brought him out to show us the tapes that I think had Dick Stratton in them, blinking his eyes all this time. But there wasn't a lot of discussion about it. We knew he was alive, so we just assumed he was going to come home. We just didn't know when. I don't know that we did it at the kitchen table. We certainly did it in church on Sundays. Certainly did it in church. All the Christmases save one were good. I mean, Christmas is a happy day, but the one where my mother had her accident, that wasn't such a good one. I woke up and my grandmother was sleeping on the sofa, and I said, "What's the matter?" Mimi said, "Well, your mother's been in a really bad car accident, and we don't know if she's going to live." And she wound up in Bryn Mawr Hospital for 6 months. So it was, it's an easy one to remember. I remember before my dad left on the Forrestal, my grandfather was the admiral at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and I remember going on the admiral's barge and going on a little scenic tour around Manhattan on the admiral's barge, and then the next day going to the World's Fair on the admiral's barge as a 5-year-old. So, I mean, you pick up on, you know, those kinds of things. And back in those days, all the admirals, you know, they all lived in housing on these various bases that were all staffed with stewards so that they could entertain and the like. You know, you get a sense that they're important people. Yes and no. I mean, it has its advantages, it has its disadvantage. I mean, but on balance, I would say no. So, I mean, nobody's going to live up to the role my dad's played. So, and I knew that a long time ago. Yeah, I took a bit of a circuitous route, but yeah, I wound up in the Navy flying A6s. Got my wings back in 1985 and did 2 deployments. One on the both peacetime, one on the American, one on the Eisenhower. He did. I mean, there was a point in time when my parents got divorced that there was no way it was ever going to happen. But when I got out of Virginia in 1982, I was going to go work in the oil business. But the cartel collapsed in June of '82, and so eventually I had been in ROTC for 2 years. I quit it, which financially, in hindsight, was a bad move. But you know, I wound up walking into a recruiter's office one day, and a while later went to aviation officer candidate school and got a commission and went to flight school. And in hindsight, being a junior officer in a fleet squadron was the greatest job I ever had in my life. I didn't know it then, but I know it now. Yeah, I mean, you're always asked, any relation to the, you know, yeah, sure, sure. But nobody treated you unfairly. I mean, people may have done things where to make sure they didn't treat you unfairly to advantage you over other people, but nobody treated me unfairly. They came a couple of days, and they just came and spent time at the house. And I think I had a football game they went to and did some film. You know, it's hard to recall a lot of it just because, you know, we were just busy. We were doing our normal thing. I remember there was a visiting football team from out of state that we were playing that weekend, and a couple of guys were staying with us. And I remember when it finally came on the news, we had to call them up and say, hey, you need to watch the news tonight. You might be on TV. So everybody got a kick out of that. We typically did that. So the church was probably pretty important back then, because when my mother was in the hospital, you know, and Joyce and Ricky Block came and stayed with us. You know, Mrs. Block worked, so it was hard for her to cook every day. So ladies from the church would bring us food, I think on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which was unbelievably kind. The only downside to it is, to this day, I won't eat a tuna casserole. They brought him and Pete Schoeffel. I think there were 5 of them all told, out to NES Jacks, and we met them out at the airport, or at the field there. There was a lot of people, a lot of press. I was actually hobbling around on crutches because I'd broken my leg playing soccer a few weeks, maybe a month earlier, you know, and lots of hugs and tears. And then shortly thereafter, he and my mother disappeared, so, which was good. I thought, aside from the fact that he was limping a little bit, I thought he looked fine. I mean, you know, he'd always had gray hair, So that was nothing new. I would never talk specifically with him about it. Where I garnered most of my knowledge about what happened over there was we had a lot of people that would come visit us, both in Orange Park and out at our beach house. And those gents, especially maybe after they got a drink or two in them, would start talking amongst themselves, and I learned to just keep my mouth shut and listen. I mean, there were, but I think for the most part, it wasn't something they really cared to relive. I mean, they did one thing they all learned how to do over there while they were in captivity, especially once they were beyond the days of the solitary confinement, was they were very good at telling stories. I remember one gent in particular, a gentleman named Bob Lilly, I think's grandfather or somebody was like one of the original Texas Rangers. He could tell a story like it was just like reading a book. I mean, I heard him tell some stories about going down to sick bay on the Forrestal and talking to these guys who were so badly burnt they were basically unrecognizable, and he knew they were going to die, and that, you tell it got to him. Well, I remember when he came back from the Forrestal, he had shrapnel wounds. That that's an interesting thing because it's actually a puncture in the skin that takes a while to heal. And then when he came back, one of his legs, he had trouble. He couldn't really bend it until he started going to physical therapy. And then both his arms, he was limited to how much, especially height-wise, how much mobility he had with those. And I think it bothered him some because, before he left, he was just an insanely active guy. I mean, he loved to play tennis, which he tried to some extent when he came back, but was not real successful just from a mobility standpoint. But he still, the one activity that he could really do and really enjoy was swim, be in the ocean, body surf, that kind of thing, and he did it a lot. Not really, no. But we had so many kids on our street and in the area. We had plenty of people to toss the football, the baseball. I mean, we used to play corkball. You know how to play corkball? It's you take an old wine cork and you wrap white tape around it, and you take a broom handle and you pitch it, and you got to try and hit it with a broom handle. And that's the kind of things we did to, have fun. I think the only way it might have changed him was, it might have put the seed in his head that, hey, I should have been gone a long time ago. I think maybe I was put here for bigger and better things. Surviving a couple plane crashes in Hanoi, I think might do that to you. I mean, a lot of those gents, I remember one of his real good friends, Bob Craner, who's deceased now, which is really sad because they were really close. They went about pursuing their careers. Again, I think Colonel Craner went on to be like the defense attaché in Prague. But I think they also viewed the rest of their life kind of as bonus time, and they were going to make the most of it. I mean, there's not a whole lot I can really say to it other than, I was third year at Virginia. I was on a leave from ROTC. It left a bad taste in my mouth because I knew it wasn't what my mother wanted. But by the same token, that, sometimes things are beyond your control. Really nothing you can do about it. And in hindsight, I think if you look, I think the divorce rates among the POWs were extraordinarily high. I think they're probably above 90%. So in hindsight, it's probably not unexpected. I mean, that semester, fall, my third year at UVA, I probably didn't need to be in school for a number of reasons, that being one of them. It was just different, took some time getting used to, you know. It just, I have a good relationship with Cindy, as do my brother and sister, you know, and I have a good relationship with Megan, Jack, Jimmy, and Bridget. We're not extraordinarily close, but if I ever need something, I know how to reach them. So it's, no, you know, it's, the modern world's very different than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. So that set of wings my dad had actually given me in Beeville in 1985. So by the time Jack got his wings, I was already out of the Navy flying for American Airlines. So I just thought it'd be a nice gesture to give them to Jack, and it was genuine on my part, and he sincerely appreciated it as well. But you know, we're aviators, we're not pilots, we're different, so that's a good thing. Well, I think the bravery part is pretty self-evident, but you know, I think the biggest lesson learned there is, you know, even ordinary people can do extraordinary things, which is, you know, you look back at the history of our country, World War II in particular, things that went on in the Pacific, you know, and the Europe with D-Day, you know, ordinary men are able to do extraordinary things when necessary. And then the principle, you know, ethics kind of thing, he spoke at our high school graduation, and it was the same thing that he talks about now, you know, country, honor, duty. And I think the relevant news point at that time was Watergate, and he was talking about how he did not think that history would reflect that people like John Ehrlichman and Mitchell, and I'm probably not getting the names exactly right, but he thought history would show that they were not honorable people. And that was very important to him. You know, and a lot of that goes along with what he endured with his colleagues in Vietnam. You know, they were there not to let each other down as well as themselves. So that was very important to him. I remember when he came back, they had a parade in Orange Park for him, and there were several others in there, and I can't remember all the names, but the other thing I probably remember the most was for like 2 weeks, you know, and Orange Park was a small town. There weren't very many restaurants. If we would go out to eat dinner or get something to go or whatever, there was no bill. Somebody picked it up. It was a fun experience because he caught you know, he's from a retail politicking standpoint, and this goes back to when he first ran for Congress in Phoenix. You know, he went out and pounded the pavement in Phoenix in 100-degree heat, knocking on doors, you know, trying to do everything he could to ensure the outcome of the election. And he basically took the same approach in New Hampshire in 2000, and took a unique approach because they weren't well funded, didn't have a whole lot of money for advertising, et cetera. And so he brought the press on board the bus, you know, nicknamed it the Straight Talk Express, and to try and get as much publicity as he could, and kind of caught lightning in a bottle. And it was fun. I remember going up 2 days before the primary, and you know, New Hampshire's a unique place because the people really do go to these meetings and ask questions, and they, you know, they don't. You got to be able to convince them face to face. It's a shame we can't do that in every state, but you know, the time it would take to do that. But I just remember the night before election night talking to Bill McInturf, who was his pollster then, and saying, "What are we doing?" He told me a number, and I was like, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yeah, I'm sure." And sure enough, the next night, it was a big win. And then we went on to South Carolina, where they had been trailing badly, and I decided to go out on the stump some. And at that point, the gloves kind of came off in the campaign, and some nasty stuff went on, and Bush wound up winning South Carolina. I think my dad won Michigan a few weeks later, which kept him in it, but then he lost like Virginia and at that point essentially ran out of money. If he had had the money, I think it's possible the outcome of that, but that's part of the deal. I mean, Bush did very good at getting the necessary resources to win. He was very disappointed. He was very disappointed. I don't think he ever thought he would get another chance. I mean, he was very close to getting the nomination. I mean, one South Carolina primary win away from basically being the nominee. And I remember going back. He suspended the campaign. A couple of months later, I went out to visit him out their place up near Sedona, outside of Cottonwood, and he was just very disappointed, very disappointed. I don't remember exactly when he decided he was going to do it. I've never been real involved politically. I mean, I've raised money for him and donated money, and in certain instances, gone out and campaigned. In fact, we did a fundraiser back here in 2000, where we did pretty well, which for him to raise the amount of money we raised that night, that was a good thing. But we knew he was going to start, and when he decided, he was basically going to be the front runner. And so they put this model in place of trying to raise X amount of dollars, which was kind of a flawed model to begin with, because you now had a two-term incumbent president who was leaving. To be able to plan a campaign around the amount of money they were talking about raising was a bit unrealistic, and they consequently they spent it all. At which point, I think he fired John Weaver. I can't remember the other gent's name. I think Rob Nelson. And firing John was very difficult for him. They were very close. He had a lot of fondness for John, and everybody wrote him off. And he went back up to New Hampshire. The other co-chair he had worked for George Bush too, was Rob Nelson or Bob Nelson. And consequently, the entire media, everybody wrote him off. So he'd gone from front runner to has-been, and he started going up to New Hampshire by himself, maybe one staffer, and just started town hall meeting after town hall meeting after town hall meeting. And if he didn't think a voter liked his answer to a last question, he'd chase him down in the parking lot and go discuss it with him. Eventually he did well enough to win New Hampshire, and then down to South Carolina to do the same thing, although prior to that, the Michigan primary was held. It had gotten moved up prior to South Carolina, which Romney won I think by 8 points. But Romney, that's where Governor Romney's father had been governor, and so then South Carolina happened, and we eked out a victory there, and then Florida was next, eked out a victory there, and that was pretty much a done deal from that point on. Of course, I supported it. In hindsight, do I think it was the right choice? I honestly can't say. In hindsight, I probably wished he'd have picked Governor Romney. But I also understand that the uniqueness of the candidate he was running against, he was certainly trying to look outside the box. I don't think the media were particularly fair to Governor Palin. You know, I mean, they may say otherwise, but I don't think they were one bit. You can say what you want about her. She's a very engaging individual in person. Very engaging. I went out and campaigned some, and I continued to raise money, and they would send me out to do things. I'd go to things around the state of Virginia, but you know, I still had 2 kids in Norfolk Academy. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I didn't have anybody in college yet. So I had a lot of education expense. I couldn't quit work. I had to go fly planes and stay ahead of the bill collector. But going to some of the rallies were a really good political event. Is a really cool thing to go to. And I'll tell you this: when we did a very early stage fundraiser here in Norfolk, you know, before the campaign imploded, everything, we were at a thing. It was a fundraiser, and everybody was saying that, you know, Hillary's who you got to watch. You got to watch. My wife's made a comment to this gentleman, and she said, "Well, I think Barack Obama's who you got to watch." And this guy kind of poo-pooed my wife, which is not smart because my wife's very smart. And then my dad got up and was giving his thing, and he said, you know, everybody's saying Hillary, but he says, I want to tell you, he says, when it's your first event and 18,000 people come out in the rain in Springfield, Illinois, I think is where it was. I can't be certain. He goes, that's somebody you got to watch out for. And that's the nature of political events. When they are really good, you really can capture lightning in a bottle and things start rolling. I remember reading about it. I was not there, but that's just not something he was going to stand for. So he doesn't. I think if you went back and looked at his speeches, if you were to go back and see his concession speech in the South Carolina primary in 2000, where some similar type stuff had happened the other way, I think he used a line in there where he essentially said, I don't want the president in the worst way. I don't want to be president in the worst way. I want to be president for the right reasons. He certainly said something along those lines in 2000. In 2008, the line was he would rather lose the presidency than lose a war, talking about the situation in Iraq. And that's the way he feels. It's country first. It's always country first. I got a call from Cindy saying that he had to go to the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale. He had to have brain surgery, and they thought it was to remove a brain clot. And when she called me initially that time, we were convinced, everybody, and I think the doctors even thought initially that it was probably melanoma related because he had had a history of melanoma. And so it took about, I want to say 4 or 5 days, I think, to get the biopsy results back. And I had just landed in JFK. I just flown a plane back from LA, and she called. I answered the phone. And she said, your dad has glioblastoma, glio. But they're saying that if you're going to have it, where it is, and how soon they think they've got it, this is about the best, you know, you can have in this situation. So I, of course, then, you know, I said, well, we'll pray for him, keep us posted, et cetera, et cetera. So the first thing I did was call an oncologist friend of mine who went to Virginia with me and said, you know, what's the deal, Wheezy? And he said, it's not good, Doug. It's not good. So it's a nasty disease. But, I mean, the thing is, it's, you know, that same gal, I mean, he's 80. He's had a pretty good run. she calls me like 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, or sends me an email. We just got the biopsy results back. My 31-year-old nephew has glio. So I, of course, text her. We immediately got on the phone, and that's the people it really stinks for. He's a kinetic. I mean, he's just like his mother. I mean, he's constant motion. I mean, I went to visit him when he first got diagnosed after the first surgery, and he came back. He made the speech on the Senate floor, and then they had the healthcare vote. We had already had a family thing scheduled a few weeks later in August, but I didn't want to wait that long. So I flew out, drove up to the cabin, spent the weekend with him and Mark Salter and Megan. And the next day we got to go on the obligatory hike, up the hill to the little bench that he likes to sit on. And, whenever we're out there, you always have these hikes, and, and he always says they're optional. Well, they're not really optional. Unless you're Lindsey Graham or Joe Lieberman, they participate, but if they don't want to, they don't have to. So he loves the birds, the hawks, and I don't think they have any eagles on that property, but there's a couple of hawks that have taken up residence, and he's just enjoying it. He's taking it in. It's a beautiful spot. I mean, it's to be in the high desert like that, but have a creek going through it and have it water and have everything so green, it's pretty neat. Joe Lieberman, Lindsey Graham, and John McCain. I think they were named by David Petraeus. So for the hotels they've gone out around the world trying to learn about defense stuff. Joe's a kind man. I remember going to doing a campaign event with him in South Carolina. Went to a synagogue in Charleston and went to a few other places with him. He's a very nice man, and he was kind of the last of a breed in terms of a hawkish Democrat when it comes to defense, which is, it's a shame, because I think it's understandable that we all just don't necessarily agree on social issues, but I think it's important that we agree that, if we can't keep America safe, then social issues don't really mean a darn thing. But that's I think one of the biggest schisms in American politics to me right now. I still, no offense to Senator Lieberman if this makes the film, but I still probably would have preferred Governor Romney, who I like and admire a great deal, only because my dad's weakness is Mitt Romney's strength, and that's economics. And I think that would have been. I was very disappointed when Mitt Romney didn't win. I thought he was going to win that election. I think some remarkable things happened that he didn't. Superstorm Sandy being one of them. But no, it doesn't surprise me that Dad said that. Not at all. We all have regrets in life, but you can't change. Hindsight's 20/20, but you can't go back and change anything. So, and to be honest with you, and I think my dad would tell you this. I think anybody who wants to be totally honest about it, the day that Lehman Brothers failed and the markets started going haywire, he lost the election. There was no, when people look at their investment accounts and it's the single biggest drop in 70 years, they're not voting for the party in power. It's just not going to happen. And I actually think he did quite well for it to be as close as it was. I mean, some of that might have been due to the fact that, as charismatic as he was, Mr. Obama was relatively young and inexperienced. So, I mean, I've been at campaign events, and the Mike Christensen story. Who was the POW who tailored the American flag that they'd say pledge allegiance to. And then the Vietnamese found out about it, beat the crap out of him, took the flag, you know, and then they're all in the big cell, and they look over in the corner one night, and there he is trying to make another flag out of his clothes. You know, I think the first time he ever told that story was when he was still in the Navy, and he spoke at the California prayer breakfast when Ronald Reagan was governor, and there wasn't a dry eye in the House. And I've seen him tell that story at some campaign events, especially one night, I think it was in Buffalo at a war memorial there, where they just did, he and Orson Swindle and Ev Alvarez were the only people who kind of really participated aside from the crowd, and there were tears just all over the place. And people make that connection. I think the fact that, I think it has less to do with his diagnosis than it does with the fact that he knows he's never going to run again, okay? But I think even if he was going to run again, I mean, you know, maybe the diagnosis was, but there's a point where, you know, at the end of the day, he just believes there's a right way of doing things and a wrong way of doing things. And we've gone down a track in our political system that's become so partisan. You know, the Affordable Care Act didn't get a single Republican vote. The Democrats will acknowledge that it has problems, but they don't want to participate in fixing it. So we've just, you know, and I don't know if it's the diagnosis or it's just what he feels right. There are a few times, they're not a lot, but when Mr. Trump has done a couple of things regarding defense that my dad's been very vocal about supporting. You don't necessarily see a great deal of media coverage about that. To the overwhelming majority of people, he's going to be remembered as somebody who, till his last breath, did what he thought was best for the United States of America, period. I've been on probably the most recent time when his favored spirit was missing from the freezer out in Arizona. I probably got on the butt end of that temper. Fortunately, it doesn't last long. It doesn't last long. I mean, and it's not, you know, I'm trying to think what else could have. He's got a very quick wit and a good sense of humor. You know, sometimes the wit can be a little Barbie, you know, can be a little picky, but, you know, that just means he loves you. If he's not picking on you, then something's, you know, something's wrong. I know he misses, I think to this day, he probably still misses Bob Craner. I think they were real close, but